The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the hardscrabble ranch as Thomas Mackenzie guided his wagon toward the barn, exhausted from another day of trying to coax life from the unforgiving soil. He was a solitary man, having chosen this isolated patch of land precisely because it kept him far from the complications of town life and the judgments of others. At 32, he had learned that people brought more trouble than companionship, and he preferred the honest difficulty of working the land to the unpredictable nature of human relationships. As he unhitched his horses, a movement near the creek caught his attention. Two figures were stumbling along the rocky path, supporting each other as they walked. Thomas's hand instinctively moved to the rifle he kept in the wagon, but something about the way they moved, the obvious exhaustion in their steps, made him pause. As they drew closer, he could see they were young women, Apache by their dress and features, and they were in desperate condition. Their traditional dresses were torn and dusty, their faces drawn with fatigue and what looked like fever. One of them, the taller of the two, had a badly swollen ankle that she could barely put weight on. The other, younger by perhaps 2 or 3 years, had a gash on her forehead that had been crudely bandaged with strips of cloth. When they saw Thomas, they stopped, uncertain and clearly frightened, but too exhausted to run. Thomas raised his hand slowly, showing he held no weapon. "You're hurt," he said simply, knowing they might not understand English but hoping his tone would convey his intentions. "I can help." The older one said something in Apache to her sister, then turned to Thomas. "Water," she managed in heavily accented English. "Please, water." Thomas quickly brought them water from his well, watching as they drank desperately, trying not to gulp too fast. Up close, he could see they were both suffering from exposure and dehydration, and possibly infection from their injuries. Whatever had happened to them, they had been traveling hard for days. "My name is Thomas," he said slowly. "You're safe here. Let me help you." The older sister studied him with eyes that were both wary and calculating, clearly weighing their options. Finally, she spoke again. "I am Kaya. This is Muna, my sister. We are lost. Our people, we were separated from them 3 days ago. Raiders came, white men, not settlers but bad men. We ran. Muna fell, hurt her head. We have been walking, trying to find our way back." Thomas felt a cold anger settle in his chest. He knew the type of men she meant, outlaws and drifters who preyed on isolated Native American groups, stealing whatever they could and leaving destruction in their wake. "Those men won't find you here," he said firmly. "Come inside. You need food, medicine, and rest." Kaya hesitated, clearly torn between her distrust of white men and the obvious desperation of their situation. It was Muna who made the decision, swaying suddenly as her legs gave out. Thomas caught her before she hit the ground, and Kaya had no choice but to accept his help. He carried Muna into his small cabin and laid her gently on his bed, the only real bed in the house. Kaya followed, supporting herself on the furniture as her injured ankle protested every step. Thomas's cabin was simple but clean, a single large room with a bed in one corner, a cooking area with a stone fireplace, a rough-hewn table and chairs, and shelves holding his modest possessions. "The bed is yours," Thomas said, gesturing to where Muna lay. "Both of you need to rest. I'll sleep in the barn." "We cannot take your bed," Kaya protested weakly. "You can and you will," Thomas replied with a firmness that brooked no argument. "I've slept in worse places than a barn. Now let me look at those injuries." Over the next hour, Thomas cleaned and properly dressed their wounds. He had learned basic field medicine during his time in the cavalry, before he had bought his discharge and come west to escape the violence he had seen. Muna's head wound was not as serious as it looked, though she clearly had a concussion. Kaya's ankle was badly sprained but not broken. Both were suffering from dehydration and exposure, but with rest and care, they would recover. He prepared a simple meal of beans, cornbread, and the last of his dried venison, and watched as they ate hungrily. As they ate, Kaya told him more of their story. They were the daughters of Takota, a respected war chief who had been trying to lead his people to a new territory where they might find peace. The raiders had attacked at dawn, scattering the group. In the chaos, Kaya and Muna had become separated, and they had been trying to make their way north to where they believed their people would regroup. "Your father will be looking for you," Thomas observed. "Yes," Kaya said, a mixture of relief and concern in her voice. "He will not stop until he finds us. But this land is vast, and we do not know exactly where we are. We're about 40 miles south of the Red Ridge," Thomas told her. "If your people went north, they would likely camp near the river there. When you're strong enough to travel, I'll take you there in my wagon." Kaya looked at him with suspicion and gratitude warring in her expression. "Why do you help us? Most white men would not." Thomas was quiet for a moment, staring into the fire. "I've seen enough cruelty in my life," he finally said. "I've participated in enough of it, truth be told. Back when I wore a uniform and followed orders I shouldn't have followed. I can't undo any of that. But I can choose differently now. I can choose to help 2 young women who need it, regardless of who their people are or what mine have done." That night, Thomas made himself a rough bed in the barn as promised, giving the sisters privacy and safety in his cabin. He lay awake for a long time, listening to the night sounds and thinking about the risk he was taking. If anyone from town learned he was harboring Apache women, there would be trouble. But more concerning was the fact that Kaya had mentioned her father was a war chief. If Dakota found his daughters here, would he believe Thomas's intentions were honorable? Or would he assume the worst? The next 2 days passed in careful routine. Thomas tended to his chores and checked on the sisters regularly, bringing them food and fresh water, changing their bandages, and slowly watching them regain their strength. Kaya remained wary but began to relax slightly, especially as she saw that Thomas kept his word about sleeping in the barn and treating them with respect. Muna, younger and perhaps more trusting, actually smiled at him once when he brought her wildflowers he had picked near the creek. On the 3rd morning, Thomas was repairing a section of fence when he felt the ground begin to vibrate with the distant thunder of many horses. He straightened slowly, his hand moving instinctively toward the rifle leaning against a fence post, then stopping. If this was what he thought it was, a weapon would only make things worse. They came over the ridge like a wave, more warriors than Thomas had ever seen in one place, at least 150 men on horseback, armed and painted for war. At their head rode a man who could only be Dakota, his bearing and the deference shown to him by the others marking him as clearly as any badge of rank. The war chief was perhaps 50 years old, his face weathered and hard, his eyes scanning the ranch with the practiced gaze of a man who had survived countless battles. Thomas stood his ground, keeping his hands visible and away from any weapons. This was the moment of truth, and he knew his life hung in the balance. One wrong move, one misinterpreted gesture, and the warriors would ride him down. Dakota raised his hand, and the entire war party stopped as one. The silence that followed was more terrifying than any war cry could have been. The chief dismounted and walked forward alone, his hand on the knife at his belt, his eyes locked on Thomas with an intensity that made most men look away. Thomas met his gaze steadily, showing respect but not fear. Before either man could speak, the cabin door opened. Kaya emerged, moving carefully on her injured ankle, with Muna right behind her. "Father!" Kaya called out in Apache, her voice carrying relief and urgency. She spoke rapidly in her own language, gesturing to Thomas and to the cabin. Dakota's eyes never left Thomas as his daughter spoke, but something in his expression shifted. When Kaya finished, the chief stepped closer to Thomas, studying him with an intensity that felt like it could see straight through to his soul. "My daughter tells me you found them injured and lost," Dakota said in English that was better than Thomas had expected. "She says you gave them your bed, your food, and asked nothing in return. She says you treated them with honor and promised to help them find our people." "It's true," Thomas replied simply. "They needed help. I gave it. Why?" The question was blunt, demanding truth. "Because it was the right thing to do," Thomas said. "Because they were human beings in need, and I had the means to help them. I don't need a better reason than that." Dakota continued to study him, and Thomas could feel the weight of 150 warriors watching this exchange, waiting for their chief's judgment. Finally, Dakota spoke again. "You are soldier. I can see this in how you stand, how you move. You have fought my people." "I was a soldier," Thomas admitted. "Years ago. And yes, I fought Apache warriors. I'm not proud of everything I did in that uniform. But I'm not that man anymore. I left the army because I couldn't be part of that violence anymore. I came here to find a different way to live. Many men say such things, Takoda observed. Few mean them. I can only show you who I am now, not convince you with words, Thomas replied. The chief turned to his daughters, speaking to them in Apache. Both women responded, with Kaya speaking at length, her tone earnest. Muna added something that made her father's expression soften for just a moment. When they finished, Takoda turned back to Thomas. My daughters say you were kind. They say you could have taken advantage of their weakness but chose to protect them instead. Kaya, who trusts no white man after what we have endured, says she felt safe in your home. This is not a small thing. Takoda stepped back and spoke in Apache to his warriors. Several of them dismounted and began unloading items from their horses. Thomas watched in confusion as they brought forward bundles of furs, dried meat, woven blankets, and other goods, placing them in a growing pile near his cabin. Among my people, Takoda explained, when someone saves the life of another, particularly the children of a chief, a debt is created that must be honored. You gave my daughters shelter, food, medicine, and safety when they had none. You offered your own bed and slept in discomfort so they could rest in security. This debt is not small, and it cannot be ignored. I don't need payment, Thomas protested. I didn't help them for any reward. That is why you deserve one, Takoda replied. A man who helps expecting nothing is rare. Too rare. You will accept these gifts because to refuse would dishonor my daughters and insult my gratitude. You will accept them because they represent not payment, but recognition that you are a man of honor in a time when such men are few. Thomas looked at the pile of goods, easily worth more than several months of his hard-scrabble farming, then back at the chief. I don't know what to say. Say you will remember that not all Apache are your enemies, Takoda said. Say you will remember that my people value honor and loyalty above all else. And know this, Thomas Mackenzie, whose name my daughters have told me, you have a friend in Takoda. If you ever have need, if danger comes to your door, you send word to the Apache camps, and help will come. This I swear. The chief raised his hand, and one of his warriors brought forward 2 horses, fine animals that made Thomas's old plow horses look like swaybacks. These are for you as well, Takoda continued. Good horses, strong and fast. They are bred from our best stock. Thomas felt his throat tighten with unexpected emotion. He had lived so long in isolation, expecting nothing from anyone, that this gesture of respect and gratitude affected him more deeply than he wanted to show. I am honored, he managed. Truly honored. Kaya and Muna came forward to say goodbye. Kaya clasped his hand briefly, a gesture that spoke of trust hard-won. Thank you, she said simply. You gave us back our lives and our dignity. That is a gift beyond measure. Muna, still somewhat unsteady but recovering, surprised him by hugging him quickly before stepping back with a shy smile. Good man, she said in careful English. Good heart. As the war party prepared to leave, Takoda spoke once more. The world is changing, Thomas Mackenzie. There is much pain and anger between our peoples, much blood that cannot be washed away. But perhaps, in small moments like this, we can find a different path. You have shown me that not all white men see us as less than human. I will remember this, and I will tell my people of the farmer who chose honor over hatred. The warriors mounted and prepared to ride out. As they did, several of them nodded to Thomas with what looked like respect. The war party that had arrived like a storm departed like a wind, disappearing over the ridge and leaving Thomas standing in the dust, surrounded by gifts and wondering at the strange turn his solitary life had taken. That evening, as he sat on his porch and looked at the 2 fine horses now in his corral and the pile of goods that would see him through a hard winter and beyond, Thomas reflected on how a simple act of kindness had changed everything. He had offered his bed to 2 exhausted strangers because it was the right thing to do, never expecting it would lead to friendship with a war chief and the promise of protection from a people he had once been ordered to fight against. In a land torn by conflict and prejudice, where suspicion and violence were the common currency between cultures, he had found something different. A recognition that humanity transcended tribal boundaries, that honor could be found in unexpected places, and that sometimes the smallest acts of compassion could bridge the widest divides. As the stars emerged in the darkening sky, Thomas felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Hope. Hope that perhaps, despite all the violence and hatred, there was still room in this harsh land for understanding, for respect, and for the recognition that all people, regardless of the color of their skin or the language they spoke, shared the same basic needs and deserved the same basic dignity. The story of the farmer who offered his bed to two Apache sisters and earned the friendship of their war chief spread quietly through both communities, told in different ways but always carrying the same essential truth. That courage sometimes meant choosing compassion over caution, and that the greatest strength lay not in the ability to destroy your enemies, but in the wisdom to recognize when someone might become your friend.